Sasha. See, I suck and wasn't even looking at the chat because there's been like no one in here. But hello, hello. I'm not that good. Just so you know, there is a delay. I have the latency set a little too high. But hentai inking stream. Don't know if I'm gonna do a full hentai inking stream. I wouldn't consider this hentai inking. It's close, but. Personal projects? Not really. I'm waiting. I mean, I don't really do personal projects so much. I'll do like a occasional pinup. I do have a pinup I'm working on. A couple of them that I'm working on at the moment. But as far as actual projects that are personal, no. As far as other projects, I'm actually not working on any projects at the moment. I'm hoping that will change here shortly. I have a penciler that I might end up working with. But he's in the middle of a book run right now, and I wasn't brought onto that project. We didn't get introduced to each other until after that was already negotiated. So on his next project, we'll see if I end up on it. But as far as like my own created content, not really. I'm not a good writer, so that's one of the big drawbacks of comic art is you kind of want to be a good writer if you want to work on your own projects. I mean, you don't have to be. Some people will do it just for the art, but I prefer story over art to an extent. Like, how well it looks matters, but I think the story matters more. I think you can get away with sloppier art with good storytelling than the other way around. The other way around, you might hook someone for like an issue or two, but then you'll lose them quick. Then you'll be that guy that'll be like, oh yeah, he's a great artist, but sucks at storytelling, which I already know that about myself. Don't need a bunch of other people telling me the same thing. I don't know what I'm getting on this Micron, but it's really starting to bother me. I actually do prefer inking more than penciling. That's actually how I got into inking. Because, I mean, penciling is part of the process for me, but I enjoy the finishing process, which for me is inking. You know, for some people that's coloring. I've never been big on coloring until semi-recently with Copic markers, but even then I'm more drawn to black and white art than I am full colored art, which has actually been part of the reason why I've always kind of preferred manga over American comics. There's just something about black and white art that, I don't know, I resonate more with. That, and as an inker, what's kind of funny is, like, the inker is the penciler's worst enemy. As an inker, you can really piss off a penciler by doing something that strays too far from what they laid on a page. And as a colorist, I could sit there and spend hours on intricate hatching and stuff like that for them to come in and color knock it out. Like do a knockout with the colors or a blur filter, and just ruin hours of work because they think it looks better as, you know, in a blur effect or something like that. So I think that black and white, whether it's graphite or inks, tends to show more technique in the line work than colors. If I was to do more color-based stuff, I think I wouldn't use blacks as heavy. I would probably use more like sepia, however the fuck you pronounce that word. But I would use sepia more for line art. I would probably only use pure black in very few instances to give it more of a painterly look. And I would do it with Copics. I like stuff that is marker colored more than computer colored. But back to your question. I like penciling. But for me, there's something about the rich darkness of ink that tells me that, you know, an image is finished. And so if I pencil something, it's so I can ink it. Like, for me, inking is always part of the step. And I actually enjoy the process of inking more than penciling. So a lot of stuff that I draw, I used to draw just to ink. If that makes sense. Like, that's the part I look forward to. Like, all right, I got this awesome idea for an image, and then it's gonna look like this, and in my head, the inks, that's what I see in my head. So the penciling was just a necessary step of getting the idea on page so I could ink it, if that makes sense. And that's actually how I got into inking as a profession, because I'd rather spend all my time doing something that I enjoy than basically saying, well, this was my idea and I drew it. Like, I could care less about that as far as enjoyability goes. But see, yeah, that's the thing. If you love penciling more, then as far as comic artwork goes, you have a lot of options, to be honest with you. In fact, this might break the continuity of the stream here in a second. But if you're not, I'm working on Adam Warren's stuff right now. And if you're not familiar with Adam Warren, I mean, you may not be the biggest fan of his content or even his art style, but one of the things that's unique about Adam Warren, especially now, is he no longer inks his work. His comics are done 100% in pencils. We're at a point in printing technology, as of probably about 10 years ago, that you don't need inks for reproduction. Especially if you're going to do something web-based. You just got to make sure you use the proper grade lead, or you do contrast correction in Photoshop before you publish. Or you can hire an inker. Those are like your couple options. But hold on one second. I'll show you some examples of Adam Warren's comic stuff. Alright, so this is Adam Warren's comic stuff. This is actually all pencils. So it's definitely possible that with the right grade lead and with contrast correction that you can do comics in just pencils. There's no need to actually ink it or even color it. It's all about the aesthetic that you want to go for, and if you want the inked look, then you can, like I said, either just deal with the inking process. You can ink it digitally, though I'm not a fan of that. It's an option. Or you can hire an inker to just kind of get through it. Yeah, that's exactly how I animate it. Yeah, believe it or not, well, originally they weren't really scanned. They were photocopied, actually. It wasn't scanned and turned into, like, if we're gonna talk about the early 2000s and before, the way it was done in pencil and animation paper using like anywhere from a 2B to a 6B pencil or 8B pencil, and it was photocopied onto acetate, which is clear plastic, and then the colorist would paint on the reverse side of the acetate. So basically the colors would be behind the inks. So the reason they had to use such a, 2B to 6B lead was two reasons. One, the line had to be dark enough. Photocopiers at the time used what's called 50% threshold, which is, and actually they still do, black and white printers still use that, or scanners, or photocopiers rather. So anything that's below 50% gray or lighter than 50% gray comes out white, and anything darker is black. So you have to make sure that your line is sufficiently dark enough to reproduce as black, so it has to be darker than 50% gray. But the other thing is you want your line to be smooth. Like the actual drawing experience, you want to be smooth. So the softer lead pencil you use, the smoother the feel is, which is why I finish my stuff in 2B to 4B. And anyway, so yeah, it was photocopied on to the acetate and then physically painted on the reverse side. Now they do scan it, and it's done automatically through the same method at the 50% threshold. And a lot of cases now, they've actually gone to all digital production, where you basically are using something like, it's not Clip Studio, but there's a program that's very similar to Clip Studio that's formatted for animation, and you can do all of your animation digitally, from keyframes, everything. But I don't think a lot of studios have moved over to that, and the reason is cost. The computers, they would have to buy all new computers and everything like that. But coloring has gone digital a while ago. Believe it or not, photocopying in the Japanese industry is extremely common. That's actually why manga is done half-toned. So it's using screen tone, you know, in the grays or dots, because it's still literally photocopied when the reduction is done. It's literally photocopied. I don't know if that's changed, but that's how it used to be. And that's, to an extent, how American comics were done back in the day. But we've always had full color, so it was, you know, printed in color. But for me, I would agree, digital is nowhere near as fun as traditional art. I know a lot of people that probably disagree, but that's all preference. I mean, if you're on my channel, then you probably agree that digital is not as fun as traditional. So here's an interesting tip. If you ever smudge ink, like get ink on your hands, like a little ink spot, and then you start drawing and moving your hand around and it smudges, like so right here I have some ink smudge, you can actually erase it. People didn't know that, so I tend to, when I'm done before scanning, actually run an eraser over the inks to remove any smudges from my hands where I may have picked up ink on my hand. So like here's another spot right here that I have a smudge from ink. But because it's bound with the oils in my hand, it actually doesn't bind with the paper properly. So you can erase it. Now, if you hit like a really wet spot, then you might have some difficulty there. But I would still like say, hey, let it dry, hit it with an eraser, and then whatever doesn't come up from that, you can go back in and hit with white ink. And I guess I'll throw this out there before anyone asks or sees the live stream after the fact and asks. But the nib holder I'm using obviously is different than the nib holder I've been using. And this is actually not even a nib holder. This is a pin vise, which is typically used by jewelers to hold jeweler files or small drill bits. I wanted another nib holder to hold older 102 nibs, that was distinguishable from the one I normally use. And I thought of the idea, what if I just get a 3mm pin vise? So that's what I did, and it's actually working. The problem is it's designed to hold 3mm maximum, between like 2.5 and 3mm. So getting the nib in there is a little bit of a challenge, but once it's in there, it's in there. It holds Maru nibs better than, these are like 2.8mm. They're slightly smaller than a Crowquill nib, but you can get the Crowquill nib in there. So just before anybody goes, hey, what is that nib holder you're using? It's not even a nib holder, it's a pen vise that I got on Amazon for $6. Which, in essence, is no different than any other metal nib holder. They're really just pen vices. But they're designed slightly different. If you notice, there's knurling here because that's meant for twisting or gripping for filing or drilling, whereas my other nib holder doesn't have that. And the end is different, so this tapers more, whereas this one doesn't. But the actual overall length is exactly the same, the weight is the same. I mean, it's pretty much the same exact thing. Gets the job done. It's aluminum. In the hand, I think it feels pretty much the exact same. So, I have previously put a link on where you can get the gold nib holder that I use. But, if you want a silver one, just buy a pin vise on Amazon that holds 3mm bits. And you'll be all set. And for anybody that's also wondering, the ink I'm using is Koh-i-Noor Ultra Draw. It's probably one of my favorite inks for nib use. But you gotta be picky about what paper you use it on. The only paper that handles Ultra Draw ink, in my experience, is either Strathmore or Canson Bristol. That's it. So this is actually Strathmore 300 that I'm using. And the guidelines that I have on here, you can see I have like custom guidelines. They're guidelines that I made in Photoshop based on the Eon minimal guidelines, and I use it for scaling whatever artwork I'm putting on. It's not even really necessary because I'm not penciling on the board that I even put the guidelines on there. I just do it to give it more of a traditional look for the original art. But if I was doing like a true pinup or something, I wouldn't put them on there. I would just use it for scaling purposes to make sure that I'm within the trim area of whatever pencils I'm blue lining. So for example, like my own stuff that I do, when I still blue line the stuff, but it normally gets slightly reduced before I ink it by like maybe 1% or so. I rescale it on the board. And the main reason I do that is sometimes things can get wonky when you scan it. I don't know why, but I've scanned stuff, like the same thing twice, and tried to overlay it, and it was slightly off, even though it was, you know, like the alignment was slightly off. And that's like, you know, just if you're doing two different pages, you're scanning them in, like just the slightest misalignment would change how it prints. So I realign everything and rescale it before I print it out for inking. And then after I scan it back in, after inking, I then reposition it and everything again. That way all the pages line up. It is a pain, but that's something that nowadays you have to do, because before you would send in your original inks back to the company and they'd send them over to the colorist and he'd scan them, or he'd do the formatting. But now it's kind of expected to an extent, depending on what colorist you're working with, that you do the formatting, because it's quicker for them or whatever. I don't know. Before, you used to just scan, you would set your scanner to 11:17, scan it as a bitmap, 50% threshold, with a threshold set like around 128 to 150. You just scan it straight in as a bitmap, 300 DPI or 600 DPI, and then send it over to the colorist. And the colorist used to work at like 300 DPI. This is in the early 2000s. The colorist would work at 300 DPI because computers sucked back then. And 300 DPI bitmap inks look like crap. Just so you know. It looks super pixelated. But luckily when the colorist did his thing, it wasn't as noticeable. Nowadays, you don't have to do that. A lot of guys don't scan their art as bitmap, and it's not done at bitmap, or if it is, it's done at a higher resolution to where it's not as noticeable. It's printed at a higher resolution. Before, printing standard was like 300 to 350 DPI. Now you can print higher. You know, people print normally between 400 and 600 DPI. I think the only exception to that would be if you're self-publishing digitally. I probably, I don't know. The images don't have to be that high resolution. And it's actually better that they're not if you're doing web-based, because it just, certain areas, you know, certain fans may not have access to super quick internet, and the higher the resolution, the file, the slower it's going to take to download. So I would probably do it like 150 DPI, something like that, maybe 300 DPI. Depends on how much you reduce the image. If you keep it like, say, on 10 by 15 is the actual trim area of the board. So if you keep it at 10 by 15, then you could probably go down to like 150 DPI. But if you do the 67% reduction, then I'd probably do like 300 DPI. But you'd have to play around with it. And then just make sure it's consistent across all your pages. But alright, I'm starting to get some issues. I think this ink is starting to get a little thick. Or it's time to clean my nib. I think it's probably time to clean my nib. A word of advice: before you ever go to ink any fine details, make sure you clean your nib first. Test your nib on a spare piece of paper and make sure it's working well. And that includes, like, if you're doing any type of rendering or feathering, anywhere where you can't mess up a line. Like, you need to be able to throw that line perfectly the first time. Make sure you get all that out of the way, because the last thing you want is to go to throw a line and then, you know, and also make sure you have fresh ink on your nib. You don't want to go to throw a line and then it does that, like, it railroads, or it doesn't lay completely, or you run out of ink halfway through the line. Because then when you try to go back and do that line again, you're gonna not reproduce the same stroke that you just did. It's gonna be slightly off and it's not gonna look good. So clean your nib, put fresh ink on it, and when in doubt, put more ink on it while you're doing that spot. Like, clean it and put more ink on it. Don't just, like, redip it. But I always have, like, a rag of some sort laying, like, in my lap while I'm inking, and I'll periodically just, like, every second or third dip of ink, I'll go back and clean off the nib. And then that will last me a couple hours before I have to go in and use an actual cleaner on the nib. Because what ends up happening is the ink builds up inside of the slot of the nib, or, like, you know, between the tines of the nibs, and then you'll start to not get fine lines anymore, which is kind of what I'm getting to the point of right now. That, and this is an older nib, so it might just be getting increasingly more dull. I use, so like I was saying, for cleaning my nib, preliminary, I just wipe it with a napkin or a cloth. I use shop towels or a piece of cloth. And then what I use is I have a little jar of, this is Simply Green. I use a little jar, so the Simply Green, it's, you know, that stuff. I just put a little bit of Simply Green inside of a glass container, and I just sit the pen in there, and it dissolves pretty much any ink. And then I'll go back after it sits in there for a couple seconds to a minute or so, and then wipe it back down, and the nib is good to go. Using water, like if you use waterproof inks, like Ultra Draw ink is water resistant and it's alcohol resistant, so the only way that you're gonna get it off your nib is using ammonia or something else. So you wanna use a cleaner that works on pretty much every ink that you're gonna use. So either ammonia or something a little bit more friendly. Ammonia is a little too much of an irritant for me to recommend, so I just recommend using something, a degreaser like Simply Green or something like that. Something relatively not harsh but cleans really well. Put it in a jar and use that. Sit the nib in it for a little bit. When the nib gets really bad, I'll take the nib out of the holder and submerge it. And then I'll actually put it, I have an ultrasonic cleaner. So when the nibs start to get really bad, I'll put them in Simply Green, a little jar, and then put that jar inside of water inside of an ultrasonic cleaner, and that will clean the nibs out like nobody's business, make them brand new. Yeah. That's really common. And what that is, I have the same problem. I clean my nibs really regularly. I have water off to the side that sometimes I'll use, but it's not clean water. It's really inky water. But yeah, what ends up happening is, I don't know what just happened to my other nib holder. Oh, there it is. So what happens is, inside, in between the tines, a little bit of ink builds up. And then, or even you'll start to get a coating on the nib of a little bit of dried ink. And you want a little, you don't want the nib to be perfectly clean. You'll actually notice that the nib works better slightly dirty. But once you start getting flow issues, you need to go through and use some type of solvent to clean the nib thoroughly. Like, that's when I would leave the nib sitting in Simply Green for a couple minutes. Like I was saying, once you get flow issues, if you're going to do any delicate area where you need to get a fine line that's smooth, those flow issues are going to make your life more difficult than anything could. Like, make sure everything's clean. I'd say anything that's delicate, you want to make sure your nib's working well. So like even hair, like you want to make sure your nib's working well before you ink hair, or that your brush is working well, whatever it may be. any hatching or rendering, you want to make sure it's working well, you know. It's actually why I do half my hatching in nib or brush, and then the other half in Micron. It's something I've started doing recently. So like this area, you'll see that it has tapered lines from a nib or a brush, and then I hatch on top of it to give a bigger gradient and kind of flatten it out. So like this area, I probably do a pass after I lay in the black. I'll use the Micron to fade it into black better. So that's like what I did in this area. I have these, you know, feathered lines, but then I fade it into black better with a Micron. I've actually been using brush pens a lot lately, for no reason other than it saves me the hassle of having to clean my brushes. The ultimate sign of laziness. It's like, oh, I don't want to clean my brush, so I'm going to use a brush that's not quite as good. Believe it or not, in a lot of aspects, I think brush pens are better than actual brushes. Or actually that synthetic brushes perform better than natural hair brushes, but they don't hold as much ink. So what's funny about that is when you use a brush pen, like I have natural hair brush pens, but I think the synthetic hair brush pens work better than the natural hair ones. And since it's being fed the ink through a cartridge system, you're not really concerned about ink capacity of the brush itself and how often you have to redip it or try to maintain the perfect level of ink. That's something I find difficult with just a standard synthetic brush, is trying to keep that perfect level of ink. But with a brush pen, it's gonna have the level of ink that it has, and it's typically on the wet side. And I find that synthetic bristles handle something that's too wet better than natural bristles do. So the cheaper brush pens, in my opinion, actually work better than the expensive natural hair ones. As far as, you know, tapering and stuff like that. I think that anything else is just honestly like placebo effect. Because I actually have the exact same brush pen I was just using. That's a Kuretake brush pen. I have the exact same brush pen, like the fancier model with a sable tip, and in my opinion, the synthetic pivots a lot better and retains its point better than the synthetic or than the sable hair pen. So don't spend them $50 on the sable hair brush pen. There's like no difference between the two. If anything, the synthetic's better. Which leads me to like the next thing. It's kind of funny, I guess, but I always use microns on hair, like certain parts of hair. So like this area, like where I need these lines to be flowy and smooth, I always use a micron. I'm just using a 0.1 micron. I typically find that a 0.1 micron when working on 11x17 is fine enough to do 99% of everything. You can actually ink an entire page with a 0.1 micron if you wanted to. I'm actually not happy with how this piece is coming out, this little strand of hair. That's okay because that's what white ink's for. Yeah, I use, my favorite brush pen is, where is it? Oh, it's in my bedroom, because I was actually using it, because there's stuff that I ink just like watching TV. Like when I do, I'll show you, yeah, so the regular Pentel Fude ones are my favorite. Now my absolute favorite one out of all of them is the FL2V. Now the FL2V's got this medium blue cap. It's in between the medium and the fine tips. It's just below the medium, a little bit finer than medium, but it has like, I don't know, the taper on it's perfect. It only comes in the dye based, but what you do is you buy the pigment replacement cartridge and you just swap it out before you even use it, or you empty out the dye based one and fill it with your own ink, which is actually what I've done here. So this actually has a different ink in it, but those are my favorite. The Pentel brush pen I don't like as much as the Kuretake brush pen. I find that the Pentel brush pen with the cartridges is too dry feeling. Like it dry brushes too much for when I do quick lines. Like I have one here. And so what I did to remedy that is I use my own ink in this. So I use a blunt tip syringe and I refill the cartridge with my own ink, which is the same ink I use in my Kuretake. But so like I'll use the Pentel brush pen, but with the other ink, then it gets too wet, and I find that it's harder to get fine lines with the Pentel pocket brush than with the Kuretake. And that just has to do with the brush geometry. I think I just like the Kuretake brush geometry a little bit better for detail work. For filling in blacks, I can use the pocket brush. But that FL2V is by far my favorite brush pen of all time. I can do super fine lines with it. I can do really thick areas. Like, let me grab it out of the room real quick and I'll do this area with the other brush pen. So this is the exact same brush pen as the other one. It's the FL2V. The only difference is it doesn't have the dye-based cartridge on it. I swapped it out for the pigment cartridge right off the bat. And the dye-based cartridge, I emptied it out and filled it with my own ink. But this is the standard Pentel pigment ink, and on Strathmore board it actually looks really good. It's not quite as dark as the ink that I use, but it's plenty dark enough. Let me see if there's an area of some feathering that I haven't done yet. So yeah, so right here. So with this brush pen, I can actually get really fine feathering. It comes to a super fine point, and I think it actually comes to a finer point than the fine one does. That, and you can, to an extent, control the ink flow a little bit more on these than you can like the pocket brush pens. It's another reason I prefer these more. I know some people, quite a few people, that actually use the pocket brush and these as normal brushes, where they don't use the ink cartridge. They just dip the cartridge, just like on here there's a little ring that comes with it that you have to take off for it to actually puncture, and people would just like leave it in that state and dip it in their own ink and use it as a brush that's like a cheap disposable brush that works really well. Which I tried that, but I found that I didn't like. I would rather just use my normal brushes. If I'm dipping things, I'd rather just use my normal brushes. I use Rotring ink. So the ink that I use either Rotring or Ultradraw ink. You want to use a technical pen ink because it's thinner than standard India ink. Standard India ink, I tried it. It did not work well. Did not flow like I wanted it to. So this is what I use right here. Just regular Rotring drawing ink or Ultradraw. That Rotring ink is actually what I used for a long time. It is super dark, and it dries kind of quick though, and that's actually what was in this, which is what I used for my traditional brush inking, and it sat in there, and I never left it capped. Like I hardly ever cap my ink that's in inkwells, and it got super thick and it started drying super quick, and I don't know. So I just kind of poured all the old ink into one jar. But what I do is I'll use an inkwell, pour the Rotring ink in the inkwell, use a blunt tip syringe, and refill the cartridge with that blunt tip syringe. Or I'll use a cartridge converter. So my Kuretake brush pens have cartridge converters on them for fountain pens. So this actually is a piston, and it sucks up the ink. So this has Rotring ink in it, and then the other one has Ultradraw in it. So the other one being the Sable Hair expensive one right here, and this one has Ultradraw ink in it. And you just want to make sure that if you're using a pigment ink, that, you know, when you go to refill, clean out the brush, and let the bristles dry. Just like you would with like a normal brush. Wait, this brush pen was refilled with Rotring ink, and the cartridge that it, you know, came with. So I just keep refilling the same ink cartridge, and I just use a blunt tip syringe, like what you used to use to like refill printer cartridges. That's what I use. The Rotring ink and Ultra Draw are the thinnest, darkest inks that I've came across. So they're what I would recommend in brush pens. The problem with those inks is, again, because of how thin they are, on certain paper it may not be as dark as you want it to be. In which case, I won't be using my brush pens. I'll be using my old ink with a regular brush. So going back to the hair, so yeah, I use a micron, and the reason I use a micron a lot of times with hair is so I can use a French curve without too much worry. And then so what I'll do is, so let's smudge the ink a lot. That's a great idea. But no, seriously. So what I'll do is I'll find my curve, which I don't think this French curve has the curve that I want. So I'm gonna go through a couple different French curves and find this curve that I want. That's good enough. So what I'll do is I'll get the majority of the shape with the French curve, like that. And then I'll freehand the rest. So like the segment coming in here, like the thicker part, I'm just gonna freehand that in. And then the part from here, I'm gonna freehand all that. So it gives it an organic look, but still has precision. When it's a short line like this, I'll just freehand. And I'm very sloppy when I do hair, because I'm a firm believer that hair needs to be done quickly. So what happens is I'll throw a line, and then a lot of times what will end up happening is the line doesn't go where I want it, so I'll throw another line and then just white ink over it. The result is better than trying to like pet the line into the shape you want. So like this. That's relatively good from here to there. So I'm just gonna do that. And then I'll freehand the rest of this in. Same thing with this segment of the hair. I'll go from there to there. And then probably from here to there. And then I'm gonna switch French curves. I'm gonna do a broken line right here. And I'm just gonna throw this line in real quick. This line, there. Like that. Let's see, so this line comes out. You gotta just look at the flow of the overall shape. Boom, like that. So this line comes here and comes out that way. So I'm gonna switch French curves again. Find something that's close. Like that. Switch back to my other French curve. I actually might just freehand this in. So that's going to be all black in there. And then this comes out. I'll fill that. And then here, there, this line, starting from there to there, French curve, and then this line, from here to here, I use a French curve, and then this section of the line, from here to there, I'll freehand, and now I'll thicken it. This segment of the line kind of reverses the sweep in a short period. So boom, I'm gonna hit it there, and then freehand. Just a broken segment of the line. This area that's going to be more dark, just freehand that in. Thicken up the line. Add the line weight. Freehand. So basically, what you want is you want one side. If you think of the line as being hollow with two outside lines, you want one edge to be the French curve and one edge to be the freehand side. It looks more organic, but still has a really good precision. So all that stuff, those big sweeps, I'll do with the French curve. This right here, there's another line that comes through from here to there. I'll freehand that and freehand that out. Fill this area with black. Like that. This area is going to get filled. I'm going to go over this line again, freehand. And then I'll clean it up with some white ink. This area right here, just going to throw a couple lines through it, clean that up with some white ink. And then here, I'm just going to throw this line freehand. See, now this, I just screwed up because this curve is actually not a natural curve for me. So I'm gonna come in with my French curve. My wrist doesn't like making those curves. So I'm gonna come in with the French curve. And And then we got another weird curve here that my hand's not gonna like. I might be able to do it in 2 segments though. So if I go from here out to there and then turn the page and go from here down, there we go. Like that. And that's how I do hair. And then you can see there are a couple areas that smudged with ink, so I'm just going to erase those. I don't know how those happened, but it just erases. And then I'll come back now with my white ink. And I'll kind of look at, you know, what do I want to erase out of this. So, like, there's this area of this line. I don't like that. The rest of the line can stay. But I don't like that section of the line. So that's going to get white inked. This area where I made the line too thick, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna thin this line out with some white ink at the top. I think I'm gonna thicken that line up actually. I might cut a section of it out. And then I threw the line through part of the hair here. So I'm gonna take that out with white ink. This segment here, this strand, I'm going to take that out. So that's going to get taken out. I'll clean this up. I'm gonna white ink over the entire thing. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's actually a bad idea. I'm gonna quickly, there's nothing I can do. I'm past the point of no return on that. Let's see, let me clean my brush. And then I'm gonna white ink in here. Just to clean up some of that. I'm gonna thin this line out with white ink, make it taper better. That. And then this section looks like trash, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of work on this with white ink. The outside of the line I think is okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna come in with side with the brush. Kind of like that, and then I can go back with black ink and touch it up. That already looks 10 times better than it did. So the white ink that I'm using is Holbein Super Opaque White acrylic ink. So now I'll come back with my brush pen. And I'm going to fill this. And I'm actually gonna, this section that I erased, I'm gonna throw with the brush pen back over it. And now it looks good. The only thing that I don't like is these, where I did the broken line, it's blunt because I did it with a micron. So I'm actually gonna take some white out. I'm just gonna run it diagonal to create kind of a taper, broken line feel to it. And then I'm gonna come back with the micron, preferably a 005, if I have one somewhere. Where did my micron go? My 01 will do. And this section in the middle, I'm just gonna kind of throw in there. But I'm happy with how that came out. That's how I do hair. So. So there's still more hair I gotta do. Like, I don't know why, I just thought that, hey, I'm done because I did the outer edges of the hair. So, let's get back into this. So, this edge of the line, I'm gonna French curve that. Let's see, from here to here, I'm gonna French curve from there to there, right? And then from here to here, I'll just freehand. Coming around this curve, I'll freehand that. And then there, I'll freehand. This curve here, I'm gonna French curve. So from here to here, that's gonna get hit with a French curve. This line here is gonna get free-handed. That's a pretty natural curve for me. This is a pretty natural curve for me. So that's gonna get free-handed in. Alright, so I gotta turn this over. I gotta find my curve that I wanna use here. This is actually going in the opposite direction, so this is actually pretty natural. There. Where now, let's see, these delicate areas right here. I'm gonna French curve that in. French curve that in. This is a pretty natural curve for my hand, right there. So I'll freehand all this. This line is going to continue. To here. So that's all freehand. That's going to be freehand. These are all pretty natural curves for me, except for now we're gonna get to this spot right here where I don't know if I have a curve that's gonna work perfect for this, but boom. Just throw that there now. From here to there, freehand that bit. Freehand that, this line, I'll freehand that line, I'll freehand that line. This line here, I'll freehand. Freehand that line. Now I'm just going to build up my line weights in a couple of areas. You're going to have to rotate the paper. There's a S curve that happens here, which I'm not comfortable with S curves. So again, this little spot in here, we'll clean up. I said it's important to just throw the line. I'm using the wrong brush. Oh well. I'm using a better brush now. I'm using a Raphael. I grabbed it on accident. There's actually something interesting that happened right here where I was trying to throw in the S curve and messed up. It actually created a double line that I like a lot. So I'm actually going to do something really reckless, and I'm actually going to try to bring out this double line more. And then right there, clean that up. And go with that. I want to thicken this up a little bit. I'm going to thicken that up a little bit. So now all I'm doing is just going in and adjusting line weight. Smoothing lines out. Again, so pull that line back a little bit. Thank you, Ryan. I hate inking hair. It's my least favorite thing to ink, so I'm glad you like it. Pretty happy with that. I'll take that. So we just have this other area to do on the opposite side. A lot of S curves in hair, which is why I use French curves so much. Let's see. I don't think, let me see, that's from here to here. Freehand that in. I think a lot of this we'll be able to freehand in. There's a couple curves that I don't like doing. That curve. And then let's see. Let's see these. I can freehand in. Let's see here. I'm just throwing lines now. just adjust some line weights here. All right, so now I'll just come in, and there's a couple areas that overlapped that I don't want, where when I was throwing the line. So like right here, I don't want that part of the line. That can go away. This line I feel extends too far up, so it's gonna get pulled out here. This is going to be a broken line. And then here, the lines cross. Here the line extends too far. Here I feel that this line comes too far forward. Taper that line out a little bit. Pretty happy with that. So now I ruined that. So in a situation where that happens, that did not come out the way I wanted it to. Definitely gonna have to use correction fluid. Because I'm going to be going back over it. So I'm going to use actual correction fluid here. And that's going to get redone completely. That's going to get redone with a brush once that dries. Till then, just continue inking up top on the head. So let's come in here. And apparently I dropped ink. All right, so what you do about that? Take a napkin, tear an edge off, stick the corner of the napkin into the ink. And then you can pull up the rest. Luckily, there's no detail there. So I'm gonna come back just with the correction fluid and hey, fixed. No harm done. And so this area here, I feel it's actually probably going to be more economical to do with a brush pen. Like that. Same thing kind of with this area. I think this is gonna be easier to hit with the brush. Let's see. No, I'm gonna do it this way. Again, where I cross over, I'm just gonna cut that out with white ink. And I'll just come back. There's a couple of areas. Let's move right on along here. And then once the white ink's dry, I'm just going to come back and retouch. There we go. And we'll do this. We're gonna switch up pens for a second. Go to Zebra Maru.
Some things never to
back over to the Micron now. And now I'm switching over to Copic Multiliner 005. And a 05. This should be dry now. Let's see. Got my brush pen. So we're gonna I'm not gonna mess with that anymore. Leave it just like it is, because the more I mess with it, the more I'm gonna mess it up. That's gonna stay just like that. And then let's see what else we're gonna do. Use a 01 multi-liner here. 01 Copic. Actually, this I'm just going to do with the brush. I messed that up. It's fine. Well, I don't know. Should I end the stream? I'm getting kind of hungry. It's 7:40 p.m. Imp is done. I just gotta do Ninjet next. Might do Ninjet off stream after I eat. And that's pretty much where we are right now. It's pretty much just gotta do a little bit of man, I feel like stopping right now with the piece like 80% done would suck. Oh man. I'm hungry though. But I feel like for the sake of the stream, I should finish the piece. But at the same time, that makes me feel like I might rush, which will just ruin the quality of everything. So I don't know what I should do. Should I eat and stop the stream? Or should I finish this first, then eat? What should I do, people? I'm counting on you to make decisions for me. Please tell me what I should do. I guess I will continue for now. Actually some stuff that I wanted to do up here. There we go. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That is my progress so far. They're not from a specific anime series. They're from a comic book. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat. They're from a comic book called Empowered by Adam Warren. I also think I'm getting too hungry. So, let me just finish up one thing then. Let's do... Alright, so that's the progress on this. We're just gonna get that in frame. I think we'll call it a day for now. For everybody that stopped in to check out the stream, thank you very much. For everybody that stopped in to check out the stream, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up. If you liked it, give it a thumbs down. If you disliked it, as always. If you're watching this as a replay, thanks for taking the time to replay one of my live inking streams. New videos to come soon on the main channel as far as my art supply tour and everything else. So stay tuned for that, and everybody, I hope you have a good evening or day or whatever time it is in your area. Take care.